name is Andrew Scott, and I'm a data analyst with the Center for Analytics, Research, and Education at Appalachian State University. I'm excited to share with you today some of the initial findings from the BPractices project, in which we analyzed the correlation between good beekeeping practices and overwinter survival from years of record-keeping data. Let's get started. To begin, I want to give you some background on the BPractices project. This is a multi-staged, EU-funded project aimed to gather collective knowledge on beekeeping best practices, prove their benefit over time, and begin to understand the economic benefits of following these practices. Today, we will be focusing on the second stage, proving the practices benefit using data. This study began with prioritization of beekeeping best practices by both beekeepers and researchers alike, to rank a list of 234 practices on a level of importance. These practices broke down into a series of groups from disease management to record keeping. They're listed on the left side of the screen. From there, we were tasked with evaluating select practices using data. These practices were later published in the Good Farming Practices and Apiculture paper and was the guide for the start of our research. Now you may be wondering what data set we would use to conduct this task. For this analysis, we were lucky enough to use the Hive data set with over 100,000 hives recorded since 2010. These hives were anonymized to prevent sharing of the hive's exact location, and the customer information was anonymized to prevent sharing of private information. Hive allowed the use of their data in this study because some of their core principles focus on doing analytics for good. To give you an idea about the data analysis process, we had to go from selecting specific practices from the Good Farming Practices and Apiculture paper that could fit to a specific variable within the Hive dataset. After we selected the practices that we were interested in analyzing and made sure that there was a variable within the dataset to match to it, we had to develop the hypotheses for how the practice would affect overwinter hive survival. From there, a formula in the code had to be developed for each hypothesis based around the variable in the Hive vast database. The practices that we selected to study were critically important because we had to ensure that there were proper variables in the dataset that could help us to calculate the benefits of these practices. The practices were mainly regarding record keeping, queen replacement, treatments on the hive, and inspection rates during the different seasons. You can see the 8 practices that we based our future hypotheses on here. These are just a few of the potential practices that we could have selected, but they best fit the variables within our dataset. From those 8 practices, we developed 7 hypotheses to test. Today, I'm going to focus on 4 that, through preliminary analysis, we have found significance. These are the record-keeping hypothesis, and then those for the fall, spring, and winter inspections. But first, I want to talk you through some of the difficulty and methodology of classifying hives in the dataset as either alive or dead. Remember, we are looking at data provided by beekeepers voluntarily through an app. There are numerous reasons why there could be irregularities in input for a hive. Here are just a few. Users could stop using the service, users could combine their hives, and users could sell their hives. Accounting for these types of data irregularities is critical for providing accuracy in our findings. This research is a first pass at doing detailed data mining on beekeeping practices and will be refined as insight is gleaned from the process. Our systematic process for cleaning the dataset was a matter of ensuring that the hives that we were including in the set could be relied upon by meeting some criteria. First, we narrowed our dataset to hives just within the United States, due to the high population of users of the service that are based there, also as a way to minimize complications with seasonal changes. Next, we coded a logic stream for customers that were active between July 2013 and July 2018. That is shown in this graphic. If the customer was still active in the following spring, meaning they had some sort of action within the service, then the customer passed the first criteria. Their hives that were active in that July were then included in the study. And if in the following spring they were inspected more than once, then they were considered alive. If they had one inspection or no inspections and the customer continued to make changes to their other hives, then that hive was considered dead. This method might not be perfect and there could be exceptions, but as an initial methodology, this chain could give us context for overwinter survival rates. Ultimately, we included 821 different beekeepers with around 4,600 total hives. Of those hives that were included, 56% survived over winter and 44% died. Our projected mortality rate is higher than would be expected naturally and should be taken into consideration as we continue to iterate on the constraints for projecting if a hive is dead or alive. This is an iterative process and will take some time to perfect, but for now, we'll use this as the starting point. These hives were then broken down on state lines into regions in the United States based upon the Bee Culture magazine Honey Price Report. This could give us an idea of how the different practices were impacted by climate. You can see the tallies for each region on this slide. As you'll see here, the breakdown for the different regions of the United States is not exact, especially when it comes to climate. However, it gives us a starting point based on an already established report system. To visually show the breakdown of overwinter survival by region, we have this stacked bar chart. Additionally, we can see that the mountain region had a relatively small sample included in the study. Therefore, the findings for that region are subject to higher variance. In each region, the number of hives that survived over winter is greater than those that died. For each practice, we broke down the hypothesis, how that would be translated to the data set in the data problem, and how we would code for it in the data solution. For the record-keeping hypothesis, we used the sum number of inspections done on a hive during the beekeeping season divided by the number of hives the customer had during that beekeeping season, giving us the activity rate on that hive. Next, we used a 95% confidence interval of the average activity rate to see the difference between hives that survived and those that died over winter across different regions. In this case, we can see across the board that hives that had higher activity rates for the customer had higher survival rates on average, while some regions are significant, including New England, Mid-Atlantic, Midwest, and West Coast. Further ANOVA analysis can further help us understand the relationship between these groups. For hypotheses 4 through 6, the fall, spring, and winter inspection analysis, I'm going to walk you through how we went from the practice to the data solution. So first, for this one, this is the fall inspection analysis. The practice said to carry out thorough inspections for clinical symptoms of bee disease and presence of the queen at the end of the beekeeping season. From there, we said that a hypothesis could be if recording inspections on a hive during the end of the beekeeping season affects hive health, then we would expect to see larger rates of hives that survives over winter with more fall inspections. The data problem was, okay, so does the average number of inspections in the fall impact the hives over winter survival rates, yes or no? To do that, we looked at the number of inspections done on a hive during the fall season and tallied them and averaged by region. For the first season, we will look at the average number of fall inspections by region. As you can see, we found that on average, the regions where more inspections were recorded on a hive during the fall season, the better chance they had for survival. There was particular statistical significance in New England, Mid-Atlantic, and Midwest regions. Next, we looked at the average number of spring inspections by region. Across all the regions, more inspections on average during the spring produced higher rates of survival over winter. There was particular statistical significance in New England, Mid-Atlantic, Southwest, and West Coast regions. Lastly, we looked at the average number of winter inspections by region. Across all the regions, more inspections on average during the winter season produced higher rates of survival over that winter season. This was counterintuitive to what our initial hypothesis was, because we feared that more inspections during the winter would put the hive at risk. So, to quickly summarize all the hypotheses, we found that the recording of the bee yard address was too intertwined with using the application, making the sample biased towards this practice. The customers with higher records kept on their hives had a significant difference in the survival of their hives across regions. By doing at least one inspection during the winter months, one's hive has had a significantly greater chance surviving these harsh conditions compared to those hives that didn't receive an inspection. This trend is seen across all regions, including those with extreme winters and mild winters. One might expect less of an effect in the northern regions of the country, but the trend remains true. Running a ANOVA analysis or doing a confidence interval for each of the individual regions would give us further explanation of this trend, but for now, the overall confidence interval shown gives us preliminary insight into the beekeeping practices of inspecting hives over the winter. The introducing new queen hypothesis proved to be a bit more complicated and needs further analysis in the future. Both the number of fall and winter inspections done on a hive make a statistical difference in the overwinter survival rate, while the spring inspection count makes a slight difference. And lastly, the treatment hypothesis needs further analysis and data to trace to the overwinter survival. The main point that I would like for you to take away from this presentation is that through data mining, we're able to find insight in the practices of beekeepers. There's great value in looking for trends and patterns through data that will only benefit future research. While this might just be a first attempt at the data mining process with beekeeper inspection, long-term application data, we had to start somewhere. Working through the different methods and options to predict the outcomes of a hive without having to communicate with the beekeeper is a way to move forward. Knowing when a hive has collapsed or has a disease without having to survey gives us a quicker response option and removes the potential delay for more real-time updates. As we continue to iterate this process, the outcomes should improve as we gain more knowledge on the user's habits. I'd like to give a special thanks to our supporters and sponsors. Without your commitment to this project, we would not have been able to produce these findings. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for listening to my presentation.